Subscribe now and press the bell icon so you never miss an emotional story that touches your heart. The stadium lights blazed across the evening sky as thousands of fans gathered outside the royal palace in Madrid. It was an unusual scene, even for a city accustomed to grand celebrations. Football superstar Cristiano Ronaldo had just led his team to another championship victory, and the king himself had invited the entire squad to a special ceremony at the palace. The streets were packed with supporters, waving flags and chanting songs, their voices echoing through the ancient stone corridors of the city. Ronaldo sat in the team bus, staring out the window at the crowds. His teammates were laughing and celebrating around him, replaying their best moments from the game on their phones. But Ronaldo's mind was somewhere else entirely. He had won many trophies in his career, received countless awards, and met presidents and kings before. Yet something about tonight felt different. There was a weight in his chest that he couldn't quite explain. As the bus approached the palace gates, Ronaldo noticed the royal guards standing at attention. They wore their traditional uniforms with perfect precision, their faces expressionless and dignified. These guards were known throughout the country for their discipline and dedication. They stood watch over the palace day and night, rain or shine, never breaking their stance. Most people passed by them without a second thought, treating them almost like statues, rather than real human beings. The team filed out of the bus and began walking toward the palace entrance. Cameras flashed from every direction as journalists documented every moment. Ronaldo walked near the front of the group, his suit perfectly tailored, his hair styled just right. He looked every bit the superstar that the world knew him to be. But inside, his heart was racing with an emotion that had nothing to do with the ceremony ahead. As they passed the first guard post, Ronaldo's eyes were drawn to one particular guard standing near the main entrance. The man looked to be in his late 50s, with silver streaks running through his dark hair. His uniform was immaculate, decorated with several medals that spoke of years of service. He stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his posture rigid and formal. To everyone else, he was just another guard doing his job. But Ronaldo saw something different. In that brief moment when their eyes met, Ronaldo saw something in the guard's face that made him stop in his tracks. His teammates continued walking, not noticing that their star player had fallen behind. The security personnel tried to guide Ronaldo forward, reminding him that the king was waiting. But Ronaldo raised his hand gently, asking for just a moment. The crowd outside the gates fell silent, confused by what they were seeing. The journalists raised their cameras higher, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Ronaldo's teammates turned around, wondering why he had stopped. Even the other royal guards seemed to shift slightly. Their professional composure tested by curiosity, Ronaldo took a step toward the guard, then another. The man remained perfectly still, his eyes now focused on something in the distance, as protocol demanded. But Ronaldo could see the slight tension in his jaw, the tiny movement at the corner of his eye. This guard was not as unmoved as he appeared to be. When Ronaldo was just a few feet away, he did something that no one expected. In front of thousands of watching fans, dozens of journalists, his entire team, and the royal household, Cristiano Ronaldo slowly bent down on one knee. Then he lowered his head in a deep, respectful bow toward the royal guard. The silence was deafening. People who had been cheering moments ago now stood frozen, their mouths open in shock. Cameras clicked frantically as photographers captured the impossible scene. This was Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the most famous athletes in the world, bowing before an ordinary guard. It made no sense. Stars didn't bow to unknown workers. Champions didn't kneel to strangers, but Ronaldo remained there, his head lowered, for what felt like an eternity. The guard's eyes finally moved, looking down at the football legend kneeling before him. For the first time since the team had arrived, emotion cracked through his professional mask. His lips trembled slightly. His eyes began to glisten with moisture. Ronaldo slowly rose to his feet and looked directly into the guard's eyes. Without saying a word, he reached out and gently placed his hand on the guard's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but profound. It spoke of respect, recognition, and something deeper that the watching crowd couldn't yet understand. The guard's composure finally broke. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek, catching the light from the palace lamps. He remained at attention, his training too strong to allow him to break formation completely. But his humanity had surfaced, if only for a moment, in that single tear. Ronaldo's own eyes were wet now too. He nodded slowly at the guard, a silent communication passing between them that needed no words. Then he turned and walked toward his teammates, who stood watching in complete bewilderment. The crowd outside began to murmur, questions spreading like wildfire. What had just happened? Why would Ronaldo bow to a guard? What connection could possibly exist between the world's greatest footballer and an unknown palace sentinel? Social media exploded within seconds. Videos of the moment were shared millions of times. News channels interrupted their regular programming to show the footage. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What was the reason behind Ronaldo's extraordinary gesture? As Ronaldo rejoined his team and they continued into the palace, he said nothing about what had occurred. His coach tried to ask, but Ronaldo just shook his head with a gentle smile. His teammates exchanged confused glances but knew better than to press him. They had learned over the years that behind Ronaldo's public persona was a deeply private man who held certain things sacred. Inside the palace, the ceremony proceeded as planned. The king gave a speech praising the team's achievement. Trophies were presented, and photographs were taken. But everyone in attendance kept glancing at Ronaldo, wondering about the scene they had witnessed outside. Even the king himself seemed curious, though he was too polite to ask directly. Throughout the entire ceremony, Ronaldo seemed distracted. He smiled for the cameras and said the right things when called upon, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Several times his gaze drifted toward the windows that overlooked the entrance where the guards still stood at their posts. He was thinking about that guard, about the moment they had shared, and about the memories that moment had awakened. The ceremony ended late in the evening, and as the team prepared to leave the palace, journalists crowded around the exits, desperate for answers. Ronaldo's security team had to create a protective barrier around him as questions were shouted from every direction. Why did you bow to the guard? Do you know him? What was that about? Ronaldo simply smiled and waved, offering no explanations as he climbed back into the team bus. That night, alone in his luxury apartment overlooking the city, Ronaldo couldn't sleep. He stood by the floor-tickling windows looking out at the glittering lights of Madrid. The celebration was still happening in the streets below, with fans honoring the championship victory. But Ronaldo's thoughts were decades away, in a small village on the island of Madeira, where his story had truly begun. He thought about his childhood home, a tiny house, barely big enough for his family. His mother had worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table, cleaning houses and working in hotel kitchens until her hands were raw. His father had struggled with his own demons, trying to provide for his family despite his personal battles. They had lived with almost nothing, sharing rooms, wearing hand-me-down clothes, and often going to bed hungry. Ronaldo remembered being that small boy, the one the other kids made fun of because his clothes didn't fit right and his shoes had holes in them. He remembered the burning desire he felt even then, the determination to change his family's circumstances. Football had been his escape and his hope. While other boys played for fun, Ronaldo played like his life depended on it, because in many ways it did. Those early years had been filled with sacrifices that the world never saw. At age 12, he had left his family and moved across the country to join a football academy in Lisbon. While other children his age were sleeping safely in their parents' homes, Ronaldo was lying awake in a dormitory, crying silently into his pillow because he missed his mother so much. He had been homesick and lonely, training harder than everyone else because he knew he couldn't afford to fail. The other academy boys had come from better circumstances. They had parents who could visit them on weekends, who sent them care packages and spending money. Ronaldo had none of that. His family could barely afford the phone calls to check on him. He had worn the same training clothes day after day until they were threadbare. Too embarrassed to ask the coaches for new ones, because he didn't want to seem needy. But there had been people along the way who had seen past his poverty and recognized something special in him. Coaches who had stayed late to work with him, teachers who had helped him with his schoolwork when he struggled, and one person in particular, someone who had changed the course of his life in a way he would never forget. Ronaldo walked to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was an old photograph, faded and creased from being carried in his wallet for years. It showed a much younger Ronaldo, maybe 13 years old, standing next to a man in a security uniform. The man had his arm around young Ronaldo's shoulders, and both were smiling. The boy in the photo looked thin and uncertain, but his eyes held that same fierce determination that would later make him famous. The man in the uniform was named Miguel Santos. He had worked as a security guard at the football academy in Lisbon, patrolling the grounds at night and watching over the dormitories. Most people barely noticed him. He was just the guard, someone who checked doors and made sure the buildings were locked. But to young Ronaldo, Miguel had been so much more. On Ronaldo's first night at the academy, when the homesickness had hit him hardest, he had sneaked out of his room after lights out. He had found a quiet corner of the grounds and sat there crying, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake leaving home. That's where Miguel had found him during his nightly rounds. Most security guards would have simply told the boy to go back to bed and followed procedure. But Miguel had sat down beside him instead. He hadn't told Ronaldo to toughen up or stop crying. He had just sat there in comfortable silence, letting the boy work through his emotions. Then, after a while, Miguel had shared his own story. Miguel had also come from poverty. He had grown up in a small village much like Ronaldo's, where opportunities were scarce and dreams seemed foolish. He had wanted to be a teacher once, but his family couldn't afford to send him to university. So he had taken whatever work he could find, eventually becoming a security guard. It wasn't the life he had imagined. But he had learned to find dignity in honest work and purpose, in helping others where he could. From that night on, Miguel had become young Ronaldo's unofficial guardian at the academy. When Ronaldo was hungry late at night, Miguel would share his own dinner with him. When Ronaldo missed his family, Miguel would let him use the office phone to call home, even though it was against the rules. When Ronaldo's training clothes became too worn, Miguel had quietly bought him new ones with his own limited salary. Telling the boy they were old uniforms he had found in storage, Miguel had attended every one of Ronaldo's academy matches. Standing quietly in the background where few noticed him, while coaches and scouts watched to evaluate talent, Miguel watched to celebrate a young boy's journey. He had believed in Ronaldo before anyone else did. Before the fame and the contracts and the glory. When Ronaldo had signed his first professional contract at age 16, earning more money than he had ever imagined. One of his first acts had been to find Miguel and try to repay him for everything. He had wanted to give Miguel money to help him the way Miguel had helped him, but Miguel had refused. He told Ronaldo that seeing him succeed was payment enough, that watching the scared 13-year-old boy become a confident young player was all the reward he needed. Miguel had made Ronaldo promise him one thing, though. He had said, "When you become famous, and you will, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the people who work in the background, the ones who do the jobs nobody notices. Guards, cleaners, cooks, maintenance workers. We're all just trying to live with dignity, just like you were. Remember us." Ronaldo had never forgotten that promise. Over the years, as his fame had grown, he had made it a point to acknowledge the support staff wherever he went. He learned names, asked about families, tipped generously, and treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. His teammates sometimes teased him about it, but Ronaldo didn't care. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be the person nobody saw. He had lost touch with Miguel over the years. Life had moved so fast, with transfers between clubs, international matches, and constant travel. He had tried to find Miguel several times, wanting to thank him properly, to show him what his kindness had meant. But Miguel had moved away from Lisbon, and despite Ronaldo's resources and connections, he had been unable to locate him until tonight. Until he had walked past that guard post at the palace and seen Miguel Santos standing there in his Royal Guard uniform. Older now, with gray in his hair and more lines on his face, but unmistakably the same man who had sat with a crying boy on a dark night 25 years ago. The next morning, Ronaldo woke early, despite having barely slept. The sun was just beginning to rise over Madrid, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He made himself coffee and sat on his balcony, the old photograph still in his hand. His phone had been ringing non-stop since the night before, with messages from his agent his manager, and countless journalists all wanting to know the story behind his gesture at the palace. He ignored them all. This wasn't a story for the media to dissect and analyze. This was personal, sacred even. The moment he had shared with Miguel belonged to them alone. A private understanding between two men whose paths had crossed at exactly the right time. All those years ago, but Ronaldo knew the world wouldn't let it go that easily. The footage of him bowing to the guard had gone viral, spreading to every corner of the globe. It was being discussed on morning talk shows, analyzed by sports commentators, and debated on social media. Everyone had a theory. Some thought it was a publicity stunt. Others believed Ronaldo was making a political statement about respecting working-class people. A few cynics suggested it was calculated to improve his public image. None of them understood. How could they? They didn't know about the scared 13-year-old boy who had sat crying in the darkness. They didn't know about the kind guard who had chosen compassion over protocol. They didn't know about the promise that had been made and kept for over 2 decades. Ronaldo spent the morning trying to find out more information about Miguel. He called contacts at the palace asking discreetly about the royal guards and their assignments. It took several hours and numerous phone calls. But eventually he learned that Miguel Santos had been working as a royal guard for the past 15 years. He had transferred to the palace after his previous position at a government building, seeking the stability and prestige of guarding the royal family. The information made Ronaldo smile. Miguel had finally achieved something significant in his career, earning a position that came with respect and honor. Yet he was still doing the same essential work he had always done, standing watch, keeping people safe, working in the background where most eyes never looked. Ronaldo made a decision. He called his agent and asked him to clear his schedule for the afternoon. There was something he needed to do, and it couldn't wait. His agent protested, reminding him of sponsorship obligations and media commitments, but Ronaldo was firm. Some things were more important than business. By early afternoon, Ronaldo was back in his car, driving through the streets of Madrid toward the palace. He hadn't announced his visit, hadn't arranged for security or photographers. This time, he was going alone as just Cristiano, the superstar the world knew. The palace looked different in the daylight, less grand somehow, more like a workplace than a monument. Ronaldo parked his car some distance away and walked toward the main entrance. A few tourists recognized him and asked for photos, which he politely declined, explaining he had an important appointment at the palace gates. A different set of guards were on duty. They recognized Ronaldo immediately and seemed uncertain about what to do. One of them spoke into his radio, clearly seeking guidance from his superiors. Ronaldo waited patiently, his hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like any ordinary visitor. A palace official appeared, looking flustered and confused. This was highly irregular. Famous athletes didn't simply show up at the palace unannounced. Ronaldo explained as simply as he could that he needed to speak with one of the royal guards, Miguel Santos. It was a personal matter, he said. Something important that couldn't be handled through official channels. The official disappeared for what felt like a long time. Ronaldo stood outside the gates, watching the changing of the guard ceremony that attracted tourists from around the world. These men took their duty seriously, he thought. They stood in the heat and cold, dealt with rude tourists and demanding officials, all while maintaining perfect composure. It was its own form of discipline, its own kind of strength. Finally, the official returned with a senior guard commander. The commander studied Ronaldo with sharp, assessing eyes. He had obviously seen the videos from the night before and seemed to be trying to determine if this visit was genuine or some kind of publicity stunt. Ronaldo met his gaze steadily and spoke with quiet sincerity. He explained that Miguel had been important to him long ago, that they had lost touch, and that seeing him last night had brought back powerful memories. He just wanted a few minutes to speak with him privately, nothing more. No cameras, no press. It's just two old friends reconnecting. Something in Ronaldo's tone must have convinced the commander because he nodded slowly. He told Ronaldo to wait and disappeared into the palace grounds. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Ronaldo wondered what Miguel was thinking, whether he even wanted to see him. Perhaps Miguel preferred to keep his memories of the young academy player separate from the reality of the famous athlete. Perhaps he was uncomfortable with the attention the bow had brought to him. Then Ronaldo saw him. Miguel emerged from a side entrance, now wearing casual clothes instead of his uniform. He walked slowly toward the gates, his expression unreadable. The commander opened a small door in the gate and gestured for Ronaldo to enter a private courtyard area. Away from the public eye, the two men stood facing each other, separated by years and experiences, but connected by a bond that time hadn't broken. For a long moment, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, and in that look was recognition, gratitude, and something deeper than words could express. It was Miguel who finally broke the silence. His voice rougher and older than Ronaldo remembered, but still carrying that same gentle warmth. He said, "You didn't have to do that last night, you know?" The bow? "I was just doing my job, same as always." Ronaldo shook his head, his own voice thick with emotion. He replied, "You've never been just anything, Miguel. You were there when nobody else was. You saw me when I was invisible. That deserves more than a bow. It deserves everything." Miguel's eyes grew moist, and he looked away briefly, composing himself. When he looked back, there was a sad smile on his face. He told Ronaldo that he had followed his career over the years, watching him rise from that scared academy boy to one of the greatest players in the world. He had felt pride, he said, but also distance. They lived in different worlds now, he and Ronaldo. One in the spotlight, one in the shadows. Ronaldo stepped closer, closing the physical distance between them. He said that Miguel was wrong, that they weren't in different worlds at all. They were both just men trying to do their jobs with dignity, trying to live with purpose, trying to honor the values that had been instilled in them. The only difference was that one job came with cameras and attention, while the other came with obscurity. He told Miguel about the promise he had made all those years ago, about how he had never forgotten it. He spoke about the countless times he had thought about Miguel, wanting to find him, to thank him properly. He explained that the bow wasn't planned or calculated. It had been pure instinct, a physical manifestation of the respect and gratitude he had carried for decades. Miguel listened quietly as Ronaldo spoke, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. When Ronaldo finished, Miguel was silent for several moments, seeming to gather his thoughts. Then he began to share his own side of the story. Details that Ronaldo had never known, Miguel explained that when he had first met young Cristiano at the academy, he had seen something of himself in the boy. Not the talent, which was already evident even then, but the hunger. That desperate need to prove yourself when you come from nothing. To show the world that your circumstances don't define your worth. Miguel had spent his entire life feeling invisible, and he recognized that same fear of invisibility in the young player's eyes. He told Ronaldo about those early mornings, when he would finish his night shift and find Ronaldo already awake, practicing his skills alone on the training ground before anyone else arrived. How he would watch from a distance as the boy ran drills over and over, perfecting his technique with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Miguel had known then that this wasn't just another talented kid who might make it. This was someone special. Someone who would go far because he understood what it meant to have nothing and was willing to sacrifice everything to change that. Miguel also revealed something that Ronaldo had never suspected. During that first year at the academy, when Ronaldo's family had been struggling more than usual, Miguel had spoken to some of the academy coaches on his behalf. He had advocated for Ronaldo, telling them that the boy needed extra support, that his talent deserved investment. Some coaches had listened, providing Ronaldo with better equipment and additional training opportunities. Miguel had never taken credit for it, never told Ronaldo, because that wasn't why he had done it. As Miguel spoke, Ronaldo felt tears streaming down his face, unchecked and unashamed. Here was a man who had shaped his destiny in ways he had never fully understood, who had worked behind the scenes to open doors without ever asking for recognition. The world celebrated Ronaldo's talent and hard work, but how much of his success had been built on the quiet kindness of people like Miguel who asked for nothing in return? Miguel continued, his voice growing softer. He explained that after Ronaldo had left the academy to begin his professional career, Miguel had often wondered if he had done the right thing. He worried that by pushing for Ronaldo to receive special attention, he had contributed to creating someone who might become arrogant or entitled. The football world was full of talented players who had forgotten where they came from, who treated ordinary people with disdain. But then Miguel had started seeing stories about Ronaldo in the news. Not just about his goals and trophies, but about how he treated people. Stories about him stopping to help stranded motorists, reports of his generous donations to children's hospitals, accounts from stadium workers and hotel staff about how he always remembered their names and asked about their families. Each story had reassured Miguel that his faith in the young boy had been justified. That Cristiano had kept his promise to remember the invisible people. Miguel paused, his voice breaking slightly. He told Ronaldo that the previous night, when he had been standing at his post and seen the team arriving, his heart had started racing. He had hoped Ronaldo might glance his way, might somehow recognize him after all these years. But he had never expected what actually happened. When Ronaldo had bowed to him, in front of all those people, Miguel had felt something break open inside his chest. It was validation for every sacrifice he had ever made, every thankless hour he had worked. Every time he had been treated as invisible, Ronaldo reached out and embraced Miguel then, holding on to the older man as they both wept openly. They stood like that for several minutes, in that private courtyard within the palace grounds, while the world went on without them. Two men from humble beginnings, connected by an act of kindness that had rippled through decades. When they finally stepped apart, they were both smiling through their tears. Miguel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looking almost embarrassed by his display of emotion. But Ronaldo told him there was no shame in it, that tears were often the most honest form of communication. They sat down together on a stone bench in the courtyard, and for the next hour, they talked like old friends. Miguel told Ronaldo about his family, his two daughters, who were now grown with children of their own. He spoke about his wife, who had supported him through every difficult decision and career change. He described his 15 years working at the palace, the interesting people he had met, the ceremonies he had witnessed, the quiet pride he took in protecting something that mattered to the country. Ronaldo shared his own stories. Not the public ones that everyone knew, but the private struggles. He talked about the pressure of constant scrutiny, the loneliness that sometimes came with fame, the difficulty of maintaining genuine relationships when everyone wanted something from you. He spoke about his own children and his hopes for their future, his desire to teach them the values that people like Miguel had taught him. As they talked, palace staff occasionally walked by, trying not to stare at the strange sight of the world's most famous footballer sitting casually with one of their guards. Some recognized the significance of what they were witnessing, understanding that this was something rare and beautiful. Others simply saw two men talking and went about their business. Eventually, the palace commander who had facilitated their meeting approached discreetly and reminded Miguel that his shift would be starting soon. Miguel nodded and stood, straightening his clothes. Ronaldo stood as well, not wanting this moment to end, but knowing it must. Before they parted, Ronaldo made a request. He asked Miguel if he would come to his next home match as his personal guest. Not in the expensive seats where sponsors and celebrities sat, but in the family section, where Ronaldo's mother and closest friends watched. Miguel initially protested, saying he didn't want to impose or take advantage of their reconnection. But Ronaldo insisted, explaining that it wasn't about giving Miguel something. It was about including him in the family he had always been part of but never knew about. Miguel finally agreed, his eyes shining with gratitude. They exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch this time. Not to let another 25 years pass without connection. Ronaldo told Miguel about a foundation he ran that helped underprivileged children and asked if Miguel might be interested in being involved. People needed to hear stories like his, Ronaldo explained. Needed to understand the impact that small acts of kindness could have on young lives. As Ronaldo prepared to leave, Miguel stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. He told Ronaldo that he had one more thing to say, something important. He looked directly into Ronaldo's eyes and said that the bow had been beautiful and meaningful, but it wasn't necessary. Miguel said that seeing what Ronaldo had become, seeing the man he had grown into, was the greatest honor he could ever receive. The bow was a gift, but Ronaldo's character was the real tribute. Ronaldo left the palace that afternoon feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight he had been carrying, the debt of gratitude he had never been able to properly repay, felt somehow more manageable now. He drove through Madrid's streets with his windows down, letting the warm air wash over him, thinking about how strange and wonderful life could be. 25 years ago, he had been a nobody, and Miguel had been one of the few people who had treated him like he mattered. Now their positions seemed reversed in the world's eyes. But the truth was more complex and more beautiful than any simple reversal. Over the following weeks, Ronaldo kept his promise to stay in touch with Miguel. They met for coffee several times, always at quiet places, away from cameras and crowds. They talked about everything and nothing, building a friendship that was different from their original relationship, but just as meaningful. Miguel shared wisdom from his years of watching people and working in service positions. Ronaldo shared insights from his experiences at the highest levels of sport and celebrity. During one of these meetings, Miguel brought his wife Alina to meet Ronaldo. She was a warm, practical woman who had clearly been the steady anchor in Miguel's life. She told Ronaldo that Miguel had come home after that night at the palace and cried for an hour, overwhelmed by the recognition and respect he had been shown. She thanked Ronaldo for giving her husband that moment. For making him feel valued in a way that his daily work rarely did, Alina also shared something that gave Ronaldo another perspective on Miguel's character. She explained that every month, Miguel donated a portion of his salary to a local youth center that provided activities and support for children from poor families. He had been doing this for decades, since long before he could afford it. When Alina had asked him why he gave away money they needed themselves, Miguel had always said the same thing, because someone had once helped him when they didn't have to. And this was how he paid that kindness forward. Ronaldo realized that the cycle of generosity he had been part of hadn't started or ended with him and Miguel. It was something that stretched backward and forward through time, connecting people who would never meet but were bound by shared acts of compassion. Miguel had been helped by someone, had helped Ronaldo, and Ronaldo had helped countless others. And all those people in turn would help others. It was a beautiful, invisible web of human goodness that held society together in ways that news headlines never captured, as promised. Miguel attended Ronaldo's next home match as a special guest. Ronaldo had arranged for Miguel and Alina to sit with his mother, and watching the three of them together brought a smile to his face even during the intense competition. After the match, which Ronaldo's team won, he brought Miguel onto the pitch during the celebration. Many of his teammates had heard stories about Miguel by then, and they greeted him with genuine warmth and respect. The media coverage of Miguel's attendance was extensive, with journalists finally getting confirmation about why Ronaldo had bowed to the guard. But Ronaldo was careful in his interviews, sharing just enough of the story to satisfy curiosity without exposing the private details that belonged to him and Miguel alone. He emphasized the broader message, that success is rarely achieved alone, and that we owe debts to people whose names we might never know. The story resonated far beyond the world of football. It sparked conversations about how society values different types of work, about the dignity of all honest labor, about the importance of remembering the people who help us along the way. Schools started using it as a teaching example about gratitude and humility. Companies began recognition programs for their support staff. In small ways, Ronaldo's gesture had started shifting how people thought about service workers and their contributions. Miguel found himself in an unusual position, suddenly recognized everywhere he went. Fellow guards at the palace treated him with new respect. It's not because his job had changed, but because the world's perspective had. Tourists asked to take photos with him. Letters arrived from around the world, thanking him for his service and his kindness to young Ronaldo. It was strange and uncomfortable at first, but eventually Miguel accepted it with the same grace he had always shown. But the most meaningful impact was more personal. Through his involvement with Ronaldo's foundation, Miguel began working with young people from difficult circumstances, sharing his story and encouraging them to persevere. He discovered he had a gift for connecting with troubled youth, perhaps because he had lived a life of quiet struggle himself and understood their challenges. One day, Miguel brought a 16-year-old boy to meet Ronaldo. The boy was from a poor neighborhood, talented at football, but struggling with confidence and direction. His name was Lucas, and he reminded both men of young Cristiano all those years ago. Ronaldo spent an afternoon training with Lucas, sharing technical advice and life wisdom. But it was Miguel who became Lucas's mentor, checking in on him regularly, attending his matches, providing the steady support that makes all the difference. Months later, Lucas signed with a youth academy, his talent finally getting the recognition it deserved. At the signing ceremony, Lucas gave a speech thanking his supporters. He mentioned his family, his coaches, and then he turned to Miguel. He said that Miguel had taught him that real strength wasn't just physical. It was the strength to show up every day with dignity, to treat every person with respect, and to believe that small acts of kindness could change the world. Watching this, Ronaldo felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The cycle was continuing. Miguel had helped him. He had helped Miguel find a new purpose. Together they were helping Lucas, and Lucas would go on to help others. This was the true meaning of legacy, Ronaldo thought. Not the trophies that would eventually gather dust, not the records that would eventually be broken, but the chain of human connection and compassion that would ripple forward through generations. During this time, Ronaldo also decided to create a special award through his foundation. It would be given annually to workers in service positions who went beyond their job descriptions to help others. Security guards, janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers. Anyone whose daily work involved serving others, but who took extra steps to make a positive impact. The award would come with a substantial financial prize and public recognition. Ronaldo named it the Miguel Santos Award for Quiet Excellence. When he told Miguel about the award, the older man was overwhelmed. He protested that his name shouldn't be attached to something so significant, that he had simply done what any decent person would do. But Ronaldo explained that this was exactly why his name belonged on it, because Miguel represented all those decent people who did the right thing without expecting recognition, and it was time their decency was celebrated. The first award ceremony was held at a hotel in Madrid, with hundreds of nominees from across the country. Ronaldo attended personally, along with Miguel, and together they presented awards to 10 recipients. There was a school custodian who had created a food pantry for struggling students, a hospital security guard who learned sign language to better communicate with deaf patients, a bus driver who had started a mobile library on his route to encourage children to read. Each story was unique, but all shared that common thread of going beyond the minimum, of seeing human need and responding with compassion. The ceremony received significant media attention, and Ronaldo used every interview to redirect focus away from himself and toward the award recipients. He talked about how these were the real heroes, the people who made society function through their daily dedication. He challenged other celebrities and wealthy individuals to create similar recognition programs, to use their platforms to celebrate the uncelebrated. As the months passed, Ronaldo noticed changes in himself. The fame and pressure hadn't disappeared, but they felt less heavy somehow. He had reconnected with something fundamental about who he was and why he played football in the first place. It wasn't just about being the best or winning the most trophies. It was about using his gifts to create opportunities for others, to lift up people who reminded him of his younger self. His teammates noticed the change too. Ronaldo had always been professional and dedicated, but now there was a different quality to his leadership. He spent more time with the younger players, not just teaching them football skills, but talking to them about life beyond the sport. He made a point of learning about the stadium staff, the kit managers, the groundskeepers. He organized team events where these support personnel were included and honored. One particular moment stood out. During a match, a young ball boy made a mistake that momentarily interrupted play. Some fans jeered, and the boy looked mortified. During a break in play, Ronaldo jogged over to the boy, put his arm around him, and said something that made the kid smile. Later, journalists asked what he had said. Ronaldo explained that he had simply told the boy that everyone makes mistakes, that it didn't matter, and that he hoped the boy would keep showing up to do his job with pride. The gesture went viral, just like the bow to Miguel had. But this time, Ronaldo barely noticed the attention. It had become natural to him now, this practice of seeing people and acknowledging their humanity. It wasn't calculated or performed. It was simply who he had become, or perhaps who he had always been, but had reconnected with. Miguel continued his work at the palace, but his life had expanded in meaningful ways. He was involved with the foundation, mentoring young people, and even been invited to speak at schools and community centers about his experiences. he discovered he enjoyed public speaking more than he had expected, finding that his years of quiet observation had given him insights worth sharing. One evening, Ronaldo and Miguel sat together in Ronaldo's apartment, looking out at the city lights and reflecting on everything that had happened since that night at the palace. Miguel said something that Ronaldo would never forget. He said that the bow had been beautiful, but what came after had been even more meaningful. Because the bow was a moment, but everything that followed was a commitment. It was easy to make a grand gesture in front of cameras. It was harder to follow through quietly, consistently, when no one was watching. Ronaldo agreed, acknowledging that reconnecting with Miguel had reminded him of lessons he had learned long ago, but had been in danger of forgetting. Success could be isolating if you let it be. Fame could make you forget what it felt like to be ordinary. But maintaining connection to your roots, to the people who had shaped you, kept you grounded and purposeful. A year after the bow that had captured the world's attention, Ronaldo organized a special event. He rented out a community center in the neighborhood where he had grown up in Madeira, the place where his journey had truly begun. He invited Miguel and Alina, along with dozens of other people who had helped him along the way. Teachers from his childhood school, coaches from his early teams, neighbors who had looked out for his family during hard times. Many of them had never met each other, connected only by the fact that they had each played a role in shaping the boy who would become a legend. The event wasn't publicized. No media were invited. This was purely personal, a private thank you to people who deserved acknowledgement. Ronaldo had arranged for everything to be perfect. There was food from local restaurants, music from musicians he had grown up listening to, decorations that reflected the island's culture and beauty. His mother was there, tears streaming down her face as she reunited with people she hadn't seen in decades. During the evening, Ronaldo stood up to speak. His voice was steady, but filled with emotion as he looked around the room at all these faces. Young and old, each one representing a moment of kindness or support that had kept him going. He told them that people often asked him what the secret to his success was. They wanted to know about his training routine, his diet, his mental preparation. And those things mattered, he said, but they weren't the real secret. The real secret, Ronaldo explained, was standing in this room. It was the teacher who had stayed late to help him with homework when he was struggling. It was the neighbor who had shared vegetables from her garden when his family didn't have enough to eat. It was the coach who had driven him to tryouts when his parents couldn't afford transportation. It was Miguel, who had seen a scared, lonely boy and had chosen compassion over indifference. Success wasn't built by one person alone. It was built by communities of people who lifted each other up, often in small ways that seemed insignificant at the time, but accumulated into something transformative. He told them about the promise he had made to Miguel all those years ago, to never forget the invisible people. He said that keeping that promise had become the most important thing in his life, more important than any trophy or record. Because what good was success if it made you forget where you came from? What was the point of climbing high if you didn't reach back to help others up? Ronaldo then announced something he had been planning for months. He was establishing a scholarship fund specifically for young people from Madeira who showed promise in any field, not just sports. The fund would cover education costs, living expenses, and provide mentorship support. It would be administered by a board that included several people in this room, people who understood what it meant to struggle and who could identify genuine potential in young people from difficult circumstances. But the scholarship would have one unique requirement. Recipients would have to commit to one day helping someone else from a similar background, passing forward the support they had received. The goal wasn't just to help individuals escape poverty, but to create a network of people committed to lifting their entire community. The room erupted in applause. But Ronaldo raised his hand for quiet. He wasn't finished. He also announced that he was donating money to renovate the community center where they were gathered, to turn it into a proper youth facility with sports equipment, study spaces, and resources for families in need. It would be named the Miguel Santos Community Center, in honor of the man who had shown him that the most valuable thing you could give someone was your time and genuine care. Miguel, sitting near the front, looked stunned. He tried to protest, to say that he didn't deserve such recognition, but the room wouldn't let him. People who knew his story stood up and applauded. Ronaldo walked over and embraced him, telling him that he deserved this and more, that his name on the building would inspire young people to believe in the power of kindness. Later that evening, after the formal presentations were done, people mingled and shared stories. Ronaldo moved through the room, spending time with each person, asking about their lives and families. He listened more than he talked, was genuinely interested in how these people had lived their lives after their paths had diverged from his. One woman, who had been a cafeteria worker at his elementary school, told him she had never forgotten how polite he had been as a child, always saying please and thank you even when other children treated her rudely. She said she had known even then that he would do something special because he had character beyond his years. Ronaldo hugged her and admitted that he remembered her too, remembered how she would sometimes slip him extra food when she could tell he was particularly hungry. Those small acts of discretion had meant everything to a boy trying to maintain his pride. While his stomach growled, a former coach pulled Ronaldo aside and apologized. He said that he had been too hard on young Cristiano, sometimes pushed him too much, expected too much. Ronaldo stopped him and explained that the high expectations had been exactly what he needed. Someone had believed he could be excellent, and that belief had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. There was nothing to apologize for as the night wore on. Ronaldo found himself standing outside with Miguel, both of them needing a moment of quiet away from the crowd. They looked up at the stars, bright and clear above the island, the same stars they had each looked at during difficult times in their lives. Finding in that vast darkness some small comfort and sense of possibility, Miguel broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. He said that he had been thinking a lot about that night at the palace, about why the bow had affected him so deeply. It wasn't just about being recognized, though that had been meaningful. It was about being seen. His whole life, Miguel had felt invisible, doing important work that nobody noticed or valued. In one gesture, Ronaldo had made him visible, had told the world that his life mattered, and his kindness had created ripples that changed everything. Ronaldo nodded, understanding perfectly. He said that was exactly why he had done it, why it had been instinctive rather than planned. Because he knew what invisibility felt like, and he knew the power of being truly seen by another person. That's what Miguel had given him as a scared 13-year-old, and that's what he had tried to give back that night at the palace. They talked about Lucas, the young player they were mentoring together, and about the other young people who were being supported through various programs. Miguel expressed worry that some of them might not make it, that despite all the support and opportunities, his life would still be hard, and some would fall short of their potential. Ronaldo agreed that this was probably true, but he said it didn't matter. What mattered was showing up, offering the support, planting seeds of possibility. Some seeds wouldn't grow, but others would, and you couldn't predict which ones. All you could do was tend the garden and hope. As they prepared to go back inside, Miguel turned to Ronaldo with one final thought. He said that the bow had started all of this, all these wonderful changes and reconnections and new programs. But he wanted Ronaldo to know that even if nothing had come from it, even if they had never spoken again after that night, the gesture would still have been meaningful. Because sometimes an act of recognition is enough in itself. Sometimes just acknowledging someone's humanity and worth is the entire point. Regardless of what follows, the event ended late, with people exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch. Ronaldo watched them leave, these ordinary people who had done extraordinary things through simple acts of decency and compassion. He felt profoundly grateful, not just for what they had done for him, but for what they had taught him about what truly mattered in life. In the weeks following the event, Ronaldo noticed that his perspective on his career had shifted even further. He still trained hard, still competed fiercely, still wanted to win every match. But the wins felt different now, less about personal glory and more about honoring all the people who had invested in him. Every goal he scored, he mentally dedicated to someone who had helped him. This one for his mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion. This one for Miguel, who had shown him kindness when he was invisible. This one for that cafeteria worker who had fed him when he was hungry. The media still followed his every move. But Ronaldo had become skilled at using that attention purposefully. Every interview became an opportunity to highlight the work of the foundation. To tell stories about people like Miguel? To challenge society's assumptions about which lives deserved recognition and respect? Some journalists found it frustrating that he wouldn't just talk about football, but others appreciated the deeper perspective he brought to his celebrity. Other famous athletes started following Ronaldo's example, creating their own recognition programs for service workers, sharing stories about people who had helped them. It became something of a movement, a push toward gratitude and acknowledgement that spread across sports and into other areas of entertainment and business. Not everyone participated, and some who did were clearly doing it for publicity rather than genuine belief. But even those superficial gestures helped normalize the idea that success was communal rather than individual. Miguel continued working as a royal guard, but his life had been transformed in ways both large and small. He walked with his head a bit higher now. It's not from arrogance, but from the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your life has mattered. His colleagues treated him with warmth and respect. Tourists who recognized him often thanked him for his service, and he accepted their gratitude with grace. But more importantly, Miguel had found a renewed sense of purpose. Working with young people through the foundation gave him energy and joy. He loved seeing their potential begin to blossom with support and encouragement. Each young person he mentored reminded him of Cristiano, and he approached that work with the same intuitive care he had shown all those years ago at the academy. Elena told Ronaldo during one of their dinners together that Miguel seemed younger now, lighter. The recognition had lifted a burden she hadn't even realized he was carrying. The burden of feeling that his life's work had been meaningless. Now he could see clearly that his daily acts of kindness, his small choices to care about people others overlooked, had created waves that reached far beyond anything he could have imagined. Years passed, and the story of the bow became part of football folklore, told and retold in different versions. Some tellings exaggerated the drama, others simplified the emotions involved. But the core truth remained. A successful man had publicly honored someone who had helped him when he was nobody, and in doing so, had reminded the world about the invisible threads of kindness that hold society together. Ronaldo and Miguel remained close friends throughout, meeting regularly for quiet dinners or walks through the city. They didn't need to talk constantly about the past or about the meaning of their relationship. They simply enjoyed each other's company. Two men from similar humble beginnings who had taken different paths but shared fundamental values about dignity, respect, and compassion. On the anniversary of that night at the palace, they always met at the same spot in the palace courtyard where they had reconnected. It became their private tradition, a moment to reflect on everything that had flowed from that single gesture. They would sit on the stone bench and talk about the young people they were helping, about changes they were seeing and how society valued different types of work, about their hopes for the future. During one of these anniversary meetings, Miguel told Ronaldo something profound. He said that the bow had been given to him, but in truth, it belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible. Everyone who had worked thankless jobs while dreaming of recognition. Everyone who had given kindness without expecting anything in return. The bow was a symbol that spoke to millions of people who saw themselves in Miguel's story. Ronaldo thought about this and realized Miguel was right. The gesture had transcended their personal relationship and become something larger. A message that resonated because it touched on universal human needs for recognition and worth. How many people around the world worked hard, tried their best, helped others when they could, but felt unseen and unvalued. The story gave them hope that their contributions mattered, even if no famous athlete would ever bow to them personally. This understanding deepened Ronaldo's commitment to the work he was doing through the foundation and the various recognition programs. It wasn't about him being a generous celebrity. It was about participating in a larger cultural shift toward acknowledging the full spectrum of human contribution and worth. Every person had value. Every act of kindness created ripples. Every job done with dignity deserved respect. As Ronaldo entered the later stage of his career, he began thinking more seriously about his legacy. He knew he would be remembered for his achievements on the football pitch, and he was proud of those accomplishments. But he hoped that the bow and everything it represented would also be part of how people remembered him. Not as proof of his humility or generosity, but as a reminder of a simple truth. We all need each other. And the most important thing we can do is see and honor that mutual dependence. The last scene of this story takes place many years later. Ronaldo had retired from professional football and was dedicating himself fully to philanthropy and mentorship. Miguel had also retired from the Royal Guard and was spending his time with his grandchildren and continuing his volunteer work with young people. They still met regularly, old friends comfortable in each other's presence. One day, they attended a graduation ceremony for scholarship recipients from the program Ronaldo had established. Young people from difficult backgrounds, supported through education and mentorship, were receiving their diplomas and certificates. As Ronaldo and Miguel watched these young people cross the stage, full of hope and possibility, they could see the continuation of that cycle of kindness that had connected them so many years ago. After the ceremony, a young woman approached them. She had been one of the first scholarship recipients and had just completed her degree in social work. She thanked them both for the support that had changed her life, and then she said something that brought tears to their eyes. She told them that she had already begun volunteering at a youth center in her neighborhood, working with children from circumstances similar to her own. She was passing forward what had been given to her, continuing the chain. Ronaldo and Miguel looked at each other and smiled, understanding perfectly what this meant. The bow had been a moment, a single gesture that lasted mere seconds. But from that moment had flowed years of impact, touching lives in ways they could see and countless others they would never know about. The young woman standing before them was proof that kindness multiplies, that one act of recognition can spark 1,000 acts of generosity. As they left the graduation ceremony together, walking slowly through the streets of Madrid, Ronaldo thought about that scared 13-year-old boy who had once sat crying in the darkness of a football academy. That boy could never have imagined this future, this web of connection and impact. But that boy's experience of receiving unexpected kindness had shaped everything that followed. Miguel, walking beside him, was thinking similar thoughts about his own journey from poverty to purpose, from invisibility to recognition. He had spent most of his life feeling that his work didn't matter much in the grand scheme of things. Now he knew differently. Every person he had helped, every small act of kindness he had offered, it's been a thread in a larger tapestry he couldn't see, but could finally feel. They reached the bench where they often sat, overlooking a park where children were playing. They sat in comfortable silence. Two old friends who had helped shape each other's destinies and, through their connection, had touched many other lives. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the city, and in that moment, everything felt complete. Not finished, because the work of kindness never finishes, but complete in the sense that their lives had mattered, and their story would continue to ripple forward through time, inspiring others to see the invisible people and bow, in whatever way they could, to acknowledge their worth.